in our previous video, we introduced the concept of carbon pools. So remember, that's where carbon is stored in the forest. So today we're going to be looking at some examples to help us illustrate those concepts that we talked about. So we're going to be looking through some tables created by the U.S. Forest Service. You can use these examples in any programs you do, and just feel free to look through the book that we're going to be discussing. The examples that we'll be looking at today came from this book right here. This was published in 2021. You're watching this in the future, obviously, so there may be a more up-to-date version of this. Just know that these numbers may be slightly out of date by the time you're watching that. It reports carbon density within different regions by forest type, as well as in a couple of different ways. So we're going to be looking at tons per acre. There are other measurements like, tons per hectare, and all kinds of other things. So just know if there's a lot you can really dig into with this book if you would like to. Just for the example of today, and to keep things kind of short, we're going to be looking at things in the Northwest, in the Southeast, and in the Pacific Northwest. And we're also, just again, to simplify things, we're going to be looking at forest examples that are only clear cuts. So the assumption with the clear cut forest um, so we're going to be looking at things that are only clear cuts, and then we're going to assume that these are clear cuts of naturally regenerated stands and comparing them to planted forests. Again, we're doing this just for, the state of, just to keep things nice and simple for us. If you want to, make your own programming, can look at, carbon pools in a number of different ways, across different forest types within regions and across regions. We're going to be looking at clear cuts of natural forest versus managed or versus planted forests. So the assumption with the planted forests is that they are in areas where there has not been forest for at least 50 years for at least 50 years beforehand. Just so you guys know. So there's going to be a couple of impacts that we'll see in there. And these are, again, broad regional trends. So individual stands and individual places are going to be slightly different. These are just broad regional numbers that we're going to use to help illustrate some concepts. So definitely don't take these numbers and try to apply them directly to all forest management. Okay, so here's one of the tables that we're going to be looking at. So we're going to walk through this table to get started, just to help you guys kind of understand what's going on in this forest. And then we're going to start to compare them to, other examples. So here we're in the Northeast. We're in a common forest, an oak hickory forest. We're going to be looking at we can see that this chart goes from everywhere from 0 to 120 years old. Just to keep things the same across all of our examples, we're going to be looking at 70-year-old forests. Now, I know you guys in the Southeast are like, wow, that's an old forest. And here in the Northeast, we're like, yeah, it's kind of getting towards, harvesting age. And in the Pacific Northwest, I don't know. I don't work with those forests. But just for fun, we're going to be sticking with 70-year-old forests. Our hardwood stands have an increment growth of every 10 years that we'll be looking at. And then the softwood or the softwood stands have an increment of every 5 years, just so you guys know. So the unit of measure here, this is board feet per acre of saw timber. And then once we get onto this side of the chart, then we move into tons per acre. So tons per acre over here. And then saw timber right over here. So the saw timber can play into our, long-term, long-lived wood products, which we'll be discussing in a later episode, but just want to put that in your head here. Okay, so let's start to really dig apart and to look at this table here and to think about things. So as we can see, we have we have a good amount of carbon stored in our forests, about 43 tons per acre. Then once we look at the underground, about 7 tons. Understory is not a lot. That's pretty constant throughout northern hickory forests. We start to add in some deadwood. This increases as our stand goes on, as we hit mortality. Forest floor, pretty constant. Actually, this would be a little bit higher if it weren't for the invasive earthworms that we have, but those earthworms are eating my whole forest floor. And then the other thing that I always find interesting with these charts is our soil. So our organic content is pretty high. The organic content is pretty high and pretty constant. About half of our, tree biomass is also stored in the forest soil, but it doesn't really change that much. So this last column here is one that we want to be looking at for total change. and how a system builds up and changes over time. This is our total non-soil carbon. Remember that the soil carbon is very difficult to manage and to think about, so that's why it's broken into its own column. This is non-soil, so these are going to be our standing trees. This is everything that's not soil. So we can see that, year one post clear cut, not a lot. And by the end of it, by the end of this rotation, which they're proposing is 120 years, we have roughly 72 tons. Pretty good. Pretty good. Okay. So this is what it looks like if we go into an afforestation situation. So again, we're going to plant a forest in an area that has not been forested for at least 50 years. So let's say, we're planting a pasture, a low grade pasture and turning that into a forest. So the big difference here is it's in our soil carbon right over here. So, let's jump back for 1 second here. Jumping back. So we're down about 1.1 tons in our young forest, or sorry, in our afforestation scenario. And that's because we're missing a lot of that dead wood and the forest floor. And then if we look at our soil carbon is, pretty lacking. It takes that whole 120-year cycle to really get the soil carbon up, back to where it should be in an area that has always been forested. The trees bounce back no problem. But it's the diversity and the complexity of the system that we're lacking in these new forests. Now, it's not saying, excuse me, that we can't get that back. By the end of 120 years, we can really start to build the deadwood back into the system. But it takes a while, to get that density built back up in the system. Okay, so let's go to somewhere a little further southeast and see how things changed down there. Now, just a number to hold in our head at the end of our rotation. In our northeastern forest, remember, we're about 70 tons per acre, 72-ish tons. So let's go down to the southeast. Now we're in a slash pine plantation. Sorry, we're in a slash pine forest. This is going to be a natural forest that is going to be managed and harvested. So I know that for most of our big southern, southeastern forestry heads, you guys like a 70-year-old slash pine forest, pretty stinking old. You're right. But we're keeping everything constant just for the sake of argumentation and concept building. So our board feet per acre in our slash pine forest, pretty similar to that in our northern hardwood stand. The big change here is the density. So our trees, we went from hardwoods, now we're into some slash pine, and those are just less dense. So they have less carbon in them. They have roughly half the carbon of our hardwoods. So they have less carbon in them overall. Moving through this chart, we can see that there's a little bit more of an understory. In our slash pine forest, a little bit more standing wood. There's less dead downwood. Our soil organics have a lot more carbon in them. Remember, in our northern hardwoods forest, it was roughly 23 tons per acre. Here we're looking at 49 tons per acre. So there's a lot that, forest soils is really important in these southeastern forests. And then overall, you're looking at a total of about 42 tons per acre. By the end of the cycle, slash pine forests don't have as long as of a rotation as northern hardwood forests. You're looking at 43 tons per acre, which is about 20 tons less than our northern forests. So that's just a little bit just due to species composition. Now, if we're looking at afforestation settings, so again, we're going somewhere where we don't have any, we haven't had trees for a long time, which is very common in the Southeast. Think like a cotton plant, a cotton field that is being planted to forest. So similar biomass, similar board feet per acre. Our big change here is our soil carbon really has to catch up, really making up for that debt, as well as we're lacking that dead wood and that complexity in the ecosystem. So it takes some time to build that back up. And, we didn't really build it back up. We're still at the end of our rotation, we're still a couple of tons shy, just because we haven't built that complexity back up. So hopefully that next rotation of forests will be able to build up some more complexity and really help to store some more carbon. So the last example we're going to look through is in the Pacific Northwest. Now, things are a little bit different out in the Pacific Northwest because that's a fantastic place to be a Doug fir. So we're looking at a Doug fir stand here. So overall board feet per acre, 7,000. Wood is just stacked in there as a forester from the north, working the Mid-Atlantic. It's just a lot of wood in that forest. Also, we're looking at roughly double the amount of total living biomass, a lot more in our coarse woody debris categories. The understory is pretty similar. If you've ever been in those Douglas fir forests out west, it's pretty dark, so you don't have a whole ton of understory. You do have, some ferns and stuff in there, but that understory is not got a lot going on. But there's a lot of coarse woody debris. Our soil carbon is very similar between the northern hardwood stands and the Douglas fir stand. When we're looking at soil carbon, the southeast is still winning out on who's got the most stuff stored underground. And then the force of the northeast, or sorry, of the northwest, the force of the northwest can just pack on a lot more carbon because, it's just a really fantastic place to be a tree. You got all kinds of rain, you got trees that can grow to be 300 feet tall. Yeah, these forests are storing like double the carbon of the northeastern and southeastern forests. Now that's on a forest level. When we look at a regional level, actually the Northeast is more important with carbon forests because these forests are so threatened from a fire and pest perspective. But that's a different thing. So now looking at our afforestation example, we can see the board feet per acre and the live timber is pretty similar. Our trees are doing just fine. We just lose again complexity in that understory and in that coarse woody debris. The other thing that we don't have is we don't have quite as much coarse woody debris built up in the soil. So this is just a slightly less complex ecosystem that will slowly gain complexity over time, but we have to build that back into the system. Okay, so a quick summary. So, afforestation is cool and good, but it is slightly less complex, and so you're going to be able to store slightly less carbon than, an existing forest. So that's why it's really important to protect and to maintain and conserve our existing forest, while doing afforestation when and where possible. Some numbers just to take away to think about. Your average oak hickory stand is somewhere around 60 tons per acre stored. Your slash pine stand is around 41 tons. And the Doug fir stands, the king stand when it comes to carbon stuff, is about 130 tons per acre, which is huge because those trees are huge, really huge trees. I really encourage everyone, if you want to take a little time to play with these tables and to look stuff up, it's a really great way to start thinking about forests and can be very helpful in your education. Um, these are just generalizations, though, so we can't take these numbers as gospel. Every forest is going to be slightly different. So just remember that. Okay. And then our reflection. So, um, take a look at the tables. Um, and look at the species that best align with your region and see what those tables look like and what the carbon stored over time is in those forests. Are you in the Pacific Northwest and putting up huge carbon numbers, or are you in the Southeast and your carbon numbers are fine? They're reasonable. They're just not Pacific Northwest numbers. And remember, it's important not to compare yourself one forest to another. Every forest is cool and unique in its own way. Okay, so this is all that we have for today. We hope these tables have been interesting as a great way to understand the concepts of forest carbon. If you're watching this video on YouTube, we encourage you to check out our free online educator course. If you're taking this course if you're taking the course, there are a few reminders for you. Make sure to complete the evaluation survey and comprehension check at the end of the module. If you have any questions, please reach out to Sarah with those questions. And that's all we got. We look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.